Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for joining. I'll just start with a short Jai Radha Madhav. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Yashodhanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodhanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jai Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jai Jaya Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 16. Please repeat after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I'll read the verse. Once again, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 16. Ragyo hi paramo dharma swadharma sthanupalanam shasato nyan yatha shastram anapadyut pathaniha. Ragyo hi paramo dharma swadharma sthanupalanam shasato nyan yatha shastram anapadyut pathaniha. The supreme duty of the ruling king is to give all protection to law-abiding persons and to chastise those who stray from the ordinances of the scriptures in ordinary times when there is no emergency. Translation: the supreme duty of the ruling king is to give all protection to law-abiding persons and to chastise those who stray from the ordinances of the scriptures in ordinary times when there is no emergency. Purport: in the scriptures there is mention of apad dharma, or occupational duty at times of extraordinary happenings. It is said that sometimes the great sage Vishwamitra had to live on the flesh of dogs in some extraordinary dangerous position. In cases of emergency, one may be allowed to live on the flesh of animals of all description, but that does not mean that there should be regular slaughterhouses to feed the animal eaters, and that this system should be encouraged by the state. No one should try to live on flesh in ordinary times simply for the sake of the palate. If anyone does so, the king or the executive head should punish him for gross enjoyment. There are regular scriptural injunctions for different persons engaged in different occupational duties, and one who follows them is called Svadharmastha, or faithful in one's prescribed duties. In Bhagavad Gita 1848, it is advised that one should not give up his occupational prescribed duties, even if they are not always flawless. Such svadharma might be violated in cases of emergency, if one is forced by circumstances, but they cannot be violated in ordinary times. The state executive head is to see that such svadharma is not changed by the follower, whatever it may be, and he should give all protection to the follower of svadharma. The violator is subject to punishment in terms of the Shastra, and the duty of the king is to see that everyone strictly follows his occupational duty as prescribed in the scripture. And then I'll just read this verse since Srila Prabhupada has quoted it, Bhagavad Gita 1848. Sajam karma kaunteya sadosham api na tyajit sarvarambha doshena tumenagni ivavrita. Every endeavor is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore, one should not give up the work born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. In conditioned life, all work is contaminated by the material modes of nature. Even if one is a Brahmana, he has to perform sacrifices in which animal killing is necessary. Similarly, a Kshatriya, however pious he may be, has to fight enemies. He cannot avoid it. Similarly, a merchant, however pious he may be, must sometimes hide his profit to stay in business, or he may sometimes have to do business on the black market. These things are necessary, one cannot avoid them. Similarly, even though a man is a Shudra serving a bad master, he has to carry out the order of the master, even though it should not be done. Despite these flaws, one should continue to carry out his prescribed duties, for they are born out of his own nature. A very nice example is given herein. Although fire is pure, still there is smoke. Yet smoke does not make the fire impure. Even though there is smoke in the fire, fire is still considered to be the purest of all elements. If one prefers to give up the work of a Kshatriya and take up the occupation of a Brahmana, he is not assured that in the occupation of a Brahmana, there are no unpleasant duties. One may then conclude that in the material world, no one can be completely freed from the contamination of material nature. This example of fire and smoke is very appropriate in this connection. When in wintertime one takes a stone from the fire, sometimes smoke disturbs the eyes and other parts of the body, but still one must make use of the fire despite disturbing conditions. Similarly, one should not give up his natural occupation because there are some disturbing elements. Rather, one should be determined to serve the Supreme Lord by his occupational duty in Krishna consciousness. That is a perfectional point. When a particular type of occupation is performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, all the defects in that particular occupation are purified. When the results of work are purified, when connected with devotional service, one becomes perfect in seeing the self within, and that is self-realization. So these are some very wonderful purports in which Srila Prabhupada is speaking about Dharma and Svadharma. So actually, I think I've got Om Jnanam Timarandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadam Hayam Tadati Swapanantikam. So, all of us, we have a particular nature that we are born with. This is something that primarily comes from our past life. We have a particular nature that we're attracted to. And many people have written on this, like psychologists, sociologists, that how when people strive to fulfill their own nature, if they're, we have Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, then they're very successful in life. But if they ignore their nature, then they feel frustrated and unhappy. Because everyone is born of a certain nature. And when a child is small, we can start to see that nature unfold. They have maybe an intellectual nature, or they have a nature where they're very good with their hands, or a nature in which they are very good in business, or they're natural leaders. They have a leadership quality. So these natures are inborn within us. And what Srila Prabhupada here is telling us, that we must act according to one's nature. Duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions. So even if we feel that my nature is so unfortunate, or so difficult, so problematic, one still has to fulfill the dharma that is related with one's nature. And we see this actually, last time also we were talking about the Pandavas and Maharaj Yudhishthira. We see this actually mentioned in the Mahabharata, how Maharaj Yudhishthira, he's of the nature, his varna is one of a Kshatriya. And he is lamenting being on one hand a Kshatriya and needing to perform his, so to say, social dharmic duties. And then on the other hand, being a pure devotee of the Lord, pure devotee of Lord Krishna, he is lamenting that how unfortunate my varna is of a Kshatriya. That due to this varna, I have to fight and I have to kill so many individuals. So according to our varna, we have a certain dharma, and that dharma is always troublesome. There's always an austerity that's associated with that dharma. And here, therefore, knowing this, Prabhupada is actually especially mentioning in the purport that the work of a Kshatriya, one may think is very bad, and therefore take up the occupation of a Brahmana, which is what Arjuna wanted to do. But then Krishna tells him that no, this is your dharma. You are a Kshatriya, and you need to perform your dharma for my satisfaction. But don't give up your dharma. And Prabhupada here is then saying that, well, if you're a Brahmana, then as a Brahmana, there will also be unpleasant duties. Of course, I think a bit less, because a Brahmana is primarily associated with the mode of goodness. But still, there are very unpleasant duties that the Brahmana must also do. And one example that Srila Prabhupada is giving here is of animal sacrifices. So the Brahmanas of the past would have to perform Ashvamedha Yagyas, where they would have to sacrifice the animal. And of course, now we don't do those things. But that was the challenge of a Brahmana as well. He had to perform things that were difficult. So in every stage of life, and in every occupation, there's certain dharmas. Then there's also dharmas in relation to a brahmachari, a grihastha, a vanaprastha, and a sannyasi. And those dharmas also change over time. So in this way, our dharmas change, our occupations change, and accordingly, our dharma is modified. And Prabhupada is saying that when the king has to ensure that the citizens are performing their own dharma. They have to be ensure that they're acting according to the dharma, and if not, then they should be punished. So they should be chastised. So the duty of a king is to make sure that everyone is properly engaged and we should, in general, live our life by the instructions of the scriptures. But then the scriptures are also so reasonable and practical also. They're saying that one should follow one's dharma always, but in cases of emergency, one may have to take up special duties, special means. And then he gives the example of Vishwamitra and how Vishwamitra had to eat the flesh of dogs. I don't know this particular story. If someone does, they can mention it, that when he had to do this, but he had to eat the flesh of dogs in an extraordinary circumstance. So many times people say that, well, what about people in Antarctica? And what about if humans are starving? Should we not eat animals? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, in that situation, we can eat animals. A human life is more valuable than an animal life. But right now, there's no shortage. The supermarkets are full of fruits and vegetables. So why in this situation, in a situation in which there's no emergency, why are we not performing our dharma? So, at times when there is emergency, then there's what Prabhupada referred to as Lokika Dharma. So there's the Shastic Dharma and there's also the Lokik Dharma, which basically means the common sense Dharma. That there's a time of emergency, the Kshatriya is supposed to fight, but if there's if there's a criminal in the house or some great calamity, then the Brahmana can also take up weapons and fight. And we see this in the Kurukshetra battle. Dronacharya and Kripacharya seem to use this logic, although they are Brahmanas, they use this logic to come on the battlefield. Although their logic is materially tainted, it's due to contamination, Prabhupada says, due to eating food cooked by karmis, by Duryodhana. They got contaminated in their mind and they came out and fought when they should not have. In any case, they knew they were fighting on the wrong side. So this was not a time to give up their dharma as a Brahmana and fight on the wrong side. Here, Srila Prabhupada is giving the example, or it was in the Bhagavad Gita, one example that a Shudra, his duty is to serve his master. And sometimes the master may ask him to do things that are not correct. And Shudra feels like this. But as a Shudra, he has no choice. He needs to fulfill the instructions of his master. Even though it is unpleasant or incorrect, he has to fulfill that. So people ask this, this is also the case in terms of war. People say, well, do the soldiers, do they get karma if there's a battle? And maybe, but maybe not. In other words, how much free will they have depends on their situation. But if they're being drafted or it is their nature to fight and they are enlisted in the army and the government is telling them, they may have to follow the instruction and the karma will go to the commanders and not to them because they are following their swadharma, their duty. So Krishna has given us these 4 ashramas, varnas, and with each one of them, they have their benefits and their trade-offs. And this is the case in every aspect in life. If we want the benefits, we also have to accept the trade-offs. We also have to accept the non-benefits. So, and this process is very scientific. So in the case of a Brahmana, the Brahmana's benefits are that the Brahmana is respected by the entire society. The Brahmana's work is one very nice, teaching and studying books and more in the mode of goodness. The Brahmana receives a charity from his disciples. He performs temple worship. The Brahmana is the head of the society. So these are the benefits of being a Brahmana. But then there are trade-offs, and the trade-off is, yes, okay, these are the benefits, but the trade-off is that therefore the true Brahmana does not accept a salary. The Brahmana accepts a life of poverty and does not accept a salary. Now, why is it that the Brahmana should not accept a salary? What is it that with these benefits of being the head of society, the advisor of the other varnas, the Brahmana is told not to accept a salary. Like we see even Chanakya Pandit, he never accepted a salary from the king. So what is the purpose of this? The purpose is that as soon as we accept a salary from someone, we become obliged to that person. Our decisions, our thoughts become tainted. We have to support that person even if we don't agree with that person's ideas. And this goes sort of similar to the modern conception of tenure, right? They give tenure to the university professors because although they do give a salary, but their salary is basically promised. It's not dependent on what type of research they do or what they publish. Why? Because they want the research, they want the teaching, they want the books to be unbiased. They don't want, for example, an administrator on the top influencing what the professors should write, or the professors writing something to please their employer. So this is a recognition, even in modern society, that a salary becomes tainted. The knowledge becomes tainted by the salary. And then you have the kshatriya, where the kshatriya receives so much power, so much prestige, such a wealthy, luxurious life, right? They collect the taxes, and all these films that you see of Mahabharata and Ramayana, everything looks good because it's all about the life of the kshatriyas and their such royalty and power and prestige. So they receive a lot of luxury, and they are the rulers of the society. That's their benefits of that varna. Then what is the trade-off? They get that benefit. Why? Because if there is a battle, then the kshatriya must stand in the front of the battle and be the first to give up their life. If there was a battle, then there was no expectation on the part of the citizens that they should go and fight, or they should be the first ones to die. And the king sits in the back. Rather, in previous times, the commander would be standing right in front. So this is the kshatriya nature. Okay, you get the benefits, you have the power, you have the royalty, but people are happy. Okay, if something goes wrong, this person is going to give his life first. They're going to risk their life for us. Nowadays, what happens is that the leaders have the power, and also they're sitting comfortably in their offices while the poor soldiers go fight and die. So this is the situation of the modern day violation of the dharma. But kshatriya dharma, again, comes with some benefits and then the trade-off. You can have that position and power if you're willing to give up your life for the benefit of others. And that was the kshatriya, and therefore they were greatly respected. No one envied them. So, okay, I don't have so much wealth, but I have a very simple, happy life. This person has so much power, but they are also taking great risk. Then the Vaishyas, they are the business community, they're the mercantile community. They also are very, very wealthy. They have employees, the Shudras. They are also well-to-do. And then this is their benefits. What is their trade-off? The Vaishya must nurture all of society. So I think most of us, a lot of us, we come in the Vaishya role. Many of us do. So it's their duty to nurture society. The Vaishyas are nurturing the Brahmanas, the cows, the elderly, the children, the animals. So it's their duty to nurture society by giving them food, by giving them shelter. This is the duty of the Vaishyas. And then the Shudras, they are the workers. They are living off of a salary, and they simply work for their master. But so they have a very easy life. They have a very steady life. They don't have to worry about the ups and downs of a business, the stress of managing a business and all these things. But the Shudras, their trade-off is that, well, because they have then an easy life, they're not taking the stress, then they must be obedient. The Shudras must be obedient to their master. They cannot, as many of us know who have jobs and are working outside, that you cannot be too arrogant. Your boss tells you something, ultimately they're the boss, you just have to follow and do it. So that is the trade-off or the sacrifice of a Shudra. So each one of these varnas has the benefits that are associated with it and certain trade-offs. And these are meant to gradually purify the soul so that they can come on the spiritual level. Now, Krishna makes a point in this verse, and this is actually a point he makes twice in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says that there may be the case where someone is a Brahmana or a Vaishya Shudra and is not performing their dharma properly, is unable to perform their dharma properly. Maybe they're not skilled enough. Maybe they're just, they make mistakes or this or that. But he's saying still it is better to continue one's dharma. It is still important to continue one's dharma in spite of the fact that there are imperfections or difficulties in performing that dharma. So the Pandavas, they went through such difficulty, right? Such hardship, but they were fulfilling their dharma in all circumstances, even up till the very, very end. It's described how Maharaj Yudhishthira, he is so pious, as I mentioned last time, that how Maharaj Yudhishthira was dharma personified. And because dharma pleases the Lord, he was so dear to Lord Krishna. So at the very end, when the battle was over and they had conquered and they had won and they were victorious, then Dhritarashtra, who was the blind, O king, he was sitting in the kingdom. He was still alive. And he was blind, and he was very, you could say, duplicitous. That was kind of his he caused the war. He schemed in different ways to kill the Pandavas. But Maharaj Yudhishthira, the Bhagavatam describes, he kept Dhritarashtra in the palace, just like as though nothing had happened. He did not see him as his enemy. Rather, Bhagavatam describes, he kept Dhritarashtra so nicely in his palace. Maharaj Yudhishthira kept Dhritarashtra, although he was the enemy, he was on the losing side. He kept him in his palace so nicely that Dhritarashtra forgot that he was living in the house of his own enemy. And Prabhupada writes that this is dharma, that although Maharaj Yudhishthira had every reason, and Dhritarashtra deserved it, to punish him, he did not do so, simply on the account of fulfilling his dharma. So the dharma cannot be given up under any circumstance. And when we don't give it up, then Krishna becomes very, very pleased. Whatever Maharaj Yudhishthira would say, Krishna would always fulfill, because he was so pleased, so happy with Maharaj Yudhishthira. So the duty of a king is to follow their prescribed dharma, set the example, and also to ensure that the citizens are on the path of dharma. And that king is the highest well-wisher. The king has two very important roles. One is protection of all the different parts of society. So protecting the vulnerable, protecting whoever, all aspects, all parts of the, if there's an enemy who attacks, as I mentioned, the Kshatriya has to go first and sacrifice their life. That is one. And the second thing that Maharaj Yudhishthira showed, and that the king must do, is to teach the citizens the principles of religion, to put them on the path of dharma. And this is why actually in modern times we see that that the contemporary kings or leaders, not leaders, the worst difficulty that they can give, or you could say leadership that they can give to a citizen, to a society, to a country, is if they reduce, and one modern philosopher, one reporter was writing this, that if they reduce the moral standing of society. And this is why now he's not president, so we can mention this is why President Trump was, even amongst non-devotees, he was a questionable president, because he made society believe that it was okay to behave or speak foul language. The president has to set the example, and to lead a sort of a very sketchy life, as his life was. That this is the marker of success. So although one may say that he didn't really do anything bad, he didn't like mess up, he didn't cause a world war or something like this, but by reducing the moral fabric, reducing the political honesty, that has a long-lasting damage. Because the leaders, if they reduce the moral standing of the society, then it happens like this. And then also there is the case of in terms of racism and these things, like of course this is a different case completely, but where they were mentioning how in previous societies, in terms of race and things, when the leaders discriminated against a certain race, like the blacks or the Jews or these things, then how their viewpoints and what they said, their moral perspective, changed the moral perspective of entire societies. And all they didn't do anything, but they just were morally not there. And then entire societies changed their viewpoints, and then entire races suffered greatly because of that. So the moral standing, the dharma, the establishment of dharma is so crucial for the king. Because if the king does not establish dharma, then the entire society is destroyed. Even if externally, materially, everything is good, people have employment, all these things, but if they don't do that, then everyone's level of morality goes down. Krishna says in the Gita, right, that everyone follows the leaders. Whatever example they set by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So if they're exemplary, the entire world will become exemplary. But if they're not exemplary, then the entire world will follow their example as well. So this is why there are apadharma, or duties in extraordinary circumstances, and there's svadharmas. There are duties that are prescribed to us according to our nature, according to normal circumstances, and everyone must follow those duties. There's the dharma of the brahmachari, to serve the spiritual master, study scriptures. There is the duties of a grihastha, and in grihastha life, there's the duties of the men and the duties of the women. And then in vanaprastha, there's certain duties. And then in sannyas, there's also certain duties. So in each one of these stages of life, there are different duties that need to be fulfilled. And the goal is that they all lead to sannyas. The goal is that by performing our prescribed duties and undergoing that purification, in performing those prescribed duties, we become purified. Gradually, we become detached, we become renounced, so that after we've done this, gone through this, after grihastha life, we become renounced, where we can then become fully surrendered to Lord Krishna. We can become detached from material life, from material attachments. And if we enjoy material life unrestrictedly, and this is why the dharmic grihastha is also enjoying, but the adharmic grihastha is also enjoying. But what's the difference? If we do it unrestrictedly, then by the time for renunciation comes, the time for sannyas comes, then we will not be ready for that. Then our purification will not be enough that we will be ready. So Prabhupada says that renunciation is the result of purification. It is not the means of purification. So if we renounce the world right now and we go away, we may come back because we haven't been purified fully. Renunciation is not the means of purification. The desires will still stay there. It's a result of purification. We get purified through the process of bhakti. So we have these svadharmas, and then we have sanatan dharma, our service to Lord Krishna. So when we perform our svadharma as a service to the sanatan dharma, and when we are performing our sanatan dharma, also our devotional service to Lord Krishna, then after some time, we become fully purified by that process. And then renunciation comes naturally in the heart of a devotee. naturally we become renounced. We become ready to give up this family entanglement. So Prabhupada says that at the age of 50, everyone must retire, right? Because the goal of household life is not to keep continued entangled in household life, but to retire. And he says this again and again and again in his books. One must retire. And then after that, after some time of retirement, Prabhupada says the man goes and takes sannyas, goes to the forest or preacher or temples and becomes a sannyasi. And the woman comes back home and she becomes the guide, the spiritual guide of the family. Because a woman's nature is not to travel alone and not to be all alone in the forest in a way that a man can, or in a city or any place like that. So they have different dharmas at that time, but both are dharmas of renunciation. Both are, the purpose is spiritual upliftment. The only purpose they have at that time is spiritual life. So these are the dharmas of the different varnas and the different ashramas. And all of these dharmas, they're meant for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu, right? All of these dharmas are ultimately, the purpose of Varnashram Dharma is not to do Varnashram Dharma. The purpose of Varnashram Dharma is not to be a very dharmic, householder or Vaishya or Kshatriya. The purpose of Varnashram Dharma is to attain Krishna. Right? The purpose of Varnashram Dharma is for the purpose of purification, so that we can one day perform pure devotional service and rise above Varnashram, become fully purified. But until we come to that point, we must, Varnashram is a very helpful aid, and following the principles of Varnashram help us in coming very close to Krishna. So I'll stop at this point. I think this covers some of the main points of these verses. And if there's any comments, questions, thoughts, please share them. Okay, so I think there's no questions or comments. So
thank you so much, Prabhu, for a wonderful class. You gave the example of, President Trump, right? And then so one has to act according to one's nature. So, I think the thing is that he accepted that position because nature is not to be in that leadership position, right? So, as a ruler, but still he accepted, but again, still he's acting according to his own nature.
Yes.
So,
yes, and see, this is the fault of modern society. You brought up a very nice point, that when a businessman, he was basically a businessman, right? When a businessman tries to be a politician, then what happens? Well, in terms of financial decisions, he made very good financial decisions for the country. The stock market went up, people were wealthy, prosperous. Money-wise, he could make the right decisions. He would negotiate good deals. But because he was not a politician, we were heading towards a world war. All the relationships with the heads of state of different countries were finished. His own staff was getting fired, 3 times a year, because he couldn't politically bring people together. So this is the role of a varnashram, and why it's so important that varnashram helps protect a person. Right? He was not meant for that. So until then, he was doing well as a businessman. He was a billionaire. But then when he took something that was not according to his nature, then it actually, though it was such a prestigious position, it actually at the end didn't help him. It put him in more difficulty. Court cases, lawsuits. He's trying to protect himself now. Before he was so carefree. So sometimes we think, oh, an opportunity is so nice, and this is a better opportunity. But if that opportunity is not according to our nature, then that opportunity may hurt us rather than help us. Now, the hard part in Kali Yuga actually is is trying to figure out what our nature is. Because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually says this, that when the birth is impure, in other words, when the parents don't do Garbhodhan Sanskar, which is the case for most of us, right? There's no Garbhodhan Sanskar done. The conception is not kind of in a pure state of mind, or the upbringing or the Krishna consciousness of the parents is not there. Then when a child is born, then they're born with mixed varnas. Like their varna is not as clear. The more clear our varna is, the more successful we will be, because the more we will be able to focus and apply ourselves to that work, right? It's a fact that the more we are on that level, we will be able to apply ourselves. If we know that this is what my nature is. People have a problem, like even myself, like, what is my nature? I like to do this. I also like to do this. I like to do this. And I'm, mediocre at everything. So that is because of this, that is a Kali Yuga problem. People don't know what their nature is. And sometimes they have mixed natures. They don't have one clear nature. So they're trying to fulfill both natures. So the problem also is how to know one's nature. And therefore, Prabhupada said in Kali Yuga, because everything is so messed up, and because we're also Vaishnavas, we're just devotees of the Lord, that's our first designation. Then Prabhupada says that we simply follow the instruction of the spiritual master. He says the first duty of the spiritual disciple is to follow the instruction of the spiritual master. And that becomes the devotee's varna and ashrama and the dharma for that devotee. Because that is our first duty in terms of a devotee. And then the spiritual master will give instruction by seeing the nature of the disciple. So the spiritual master will have more insight. We can't figure it out, but the spiritual master has the insight, and the spiritual master will give that instruction by looking at the nature of the disciple. And we see this in Prabhupada's example. Like if someone had a certain nature, was artistic, Prabhupada would encourage that and say, do art for Krishna. Or someone was of manager nature, that's a Kshatriya nature. They have the nature of a manager. And you see, like they can deal with problems, not be bogged down by them. And someone who's not a manager, problems come, they get pulled down. Others, they get problems come and they become more resilient. So what is the difference? Because they're a Kshatriya, they can face problems, all these things. So Prabhupada saw this person has leadership qualities. So encourage them. Yes, you be a manager, you be a temple president, you be a GBC, and push them and give them more and more management to do. There's one in biography, Prabhupada's biography, they mentioned how Vishnujan Maharaj was there and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there. And they were on the same bus party. And they were completely different natures. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was just like manager, so good at organizing. The whole bus party was going forward with 80 devotees, 3 buses for months on end, because his management was so perfect. And Vishnujan Maharaj, he could not even keep $1 for himself. He had $1, he'd give it away. He was playing flutes and singing and all these things. And the devotees recalled that these 2 devotees were very, very dedicated, like they're very advanced devotees. And they're both so dear to Srila Prabhupada, like completely different natures and so dear to Srila Prabhupada. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Prabhupada called him Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's best grand disciple. And with tears in his eyes, he embraced him when he said this. And then Vishnujan Maharaj, when he would come, Prabhupada and him would have such a close connection. He was so dear to Srila Prabhupada. And he would chant on the streets. Vishnujan Maharaj would chant on the streets for 8 to 12 hours a day. He would do Harinam for 8 to 12 hours a day. Can you imagine? We do Harinam like once a week for 2 hours. He was doing 8 to 12 hours a day. And Prabhupada knew his advancement and how dedicated he was to his spiritual master. And he loved him so much. But completely different. And Prabhupada could see their natures, and accordingly, he instructed them. For Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he gave him more and more management. And in the case of Vishnujan Maharaj, he inspired him more and more to do Harinam and become the preacher and the singer that he was. So according to material nature, one was a Kshatriya and the other was a Shudra. He was a musician, right? Vishnujan Maharaj was a musician. But both were equally dear to Srila Prabhupada, and both were engaged by Srila Prabhupada according to their natures. So yes.
Thank you, Prabhu. So one quick thing, I mean, is the nature that is talking about in the verse is primarily from the Varnasrama Dharma perspective, right, Prabhu?
It appears, because this is what Prabhupada is talking about Dharma. He talks about the Vaishyas, the Shudras. So the pure devotee is beyond Varnashram. Prabhupada says it's crystal clear in two purposes in the Bhagavad Gita. He says that the pure devotee is beyond Varnashram. They are not restricted by any Varnashram, but still they have a material body. And they have the material body is produced from certain parents and all these things. So still, they may have a nature, even though they're beyond Varnashram. And according to that nature, they may still decide to serve Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yes, thank you.
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhu, I just fascinated by your speech, talking about this this path of Krishna consciousness is beyond this Varnasrama Dharma. It reminds me about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Once upon a time, he was discussing about this Krishna Prema and all devotional discussion was going on. Then he was expressing his internal feeling that Sannyas lainu javesh channa hailamon kikaj sannyas tavo prema prayojan. So as I took sannyas, the meaning of that Bengali was saying that as I took sannyas, my mind has been scattered in different pieces. So that is not so important. Important to have Krishna Prema, to earn Krishna Prema in this life. So that is very effective. Varnasrama Dharma is only the process where we are on this path of Krishna consciousness. So ultimately we have to gain the unalloyed devotion to Krishna. So that has, you have lightened that one. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for your
Thank you, Prabhu.
great message.
You brought such a nice point that Lord Chaitanya was interested in love of God, bhakti. And the process of Varnashram is very slow.
Very slow, yeah.
While until we're not pure devotees, we do need to work according to our nature.
Correct.
But we do have to move beyond Varnashram also. Side by side, we have to perform the activities of Raganuga Bhakti, actually, the activities of spontaneous loving devotional service. And the reason why, because actually the Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti that Prabhupada gave us, he gave us Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti that was given in the mood of Raganuga Bhakti. Just like, as you know, Prabhu, you know this better than I do, that like Tulsi Puja, we are asking the Lord, please give me a place in your kunjas in Vrindavan. Mora e Abhilash, Vilash Kunja Diobas. That, oh Lord, please give me a place in the kunjas of Vrindavan. And the fact is that who are we at this stage to ask Krishna, give me a place in the kunjas of Vrindavan? But we are singing that song of Bhaktivinoda Thakur because he is asking, we are repeating him. And because Tamal Krishna Maharaj actually mentioned this, because Prabhupada has given us Vaidhi Sadhana in the mood of Raganuga Sadhana. What to speak of Varna Ashram, he wanted us to come to the level of Raganuga Sadhana. And therefore he gave us the process by which not only we would follow the regulated principles, but we would develop spontaneous love for Krishna.
Yes. Please bless me so I can be in this path and spontaneously can enjoy the services and hearing your sweet nectarian spiritual messages. Hare Krishna.
Well, Prabhu, you're definitely on that spontaneous level. Otherwise, no one can do what you're doing. Day and night, you're fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness and serving the Lord. So, yes. Thank you. Any other final question, comment? Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for your very kind attention. And Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada.